Hello, everybody. We continue with our session, and this time I would like to talk about courage and conviction and creative vision in relationship to the task I had to undertake of addressing personal achievement and self-realization. Alberto did an amazing job yesterday discussing processes and characteristics of a self-actualized personality individual from the humanistic psychology standpoint, and I may slightly touch on that or more add to that through some good examples, but he has already outlined all the characteristics, mental, emotional, social, psychological, of a self-actualized individual. But today I would like to start again from some amazing examples of three women that I chose this time. Three women, ancient, that I'm hoping their examples will bring us into our current moment and resonate with us through history and have a sense of a personal effect on us so that they can move us towards feeling or expanding our courage of conviction in this world, as well as our own place in this world as significant individuals. First, one of them is, trying to get here. Can I go to the next slide real quick and see? Hatshepsut is the woman pharaoh that lived from 1479 to 1458 before Christ, and it belonged to the 18th dynasty, and is fascinating because she is one of the most successful pharaohs, male or female, and one of the first females to reign solely. We know different parts of Egyptian history that we focus on, especially in literature, and that we romanticize in film, for example, in popular culture. But rarely do you see anything about Hatshepsut, who happened to establish her authority to follow through with the rituals, with proper behavior, while yet changing them from within. She used to occasionally put a beard as insignia of her pharaonic status. So in the first picture, you can see her as a woman, and in the second picture, you can see that she is embodied in a sculpture as the Sphinx, and she has actually a beard attached, a fake beard that she wore, in order to signify her status and in a convincing way. She launched a victorious, amazing military campaign only to usher in the most amazing period of peace that Egypt has known. Then what she did, she dedicated all of her time to building her empire, constructing moreover hundreds of construction projects that she actually completed. She was recognized as remarkable since childhood, and one of the narrativized or fictionalized representations of her come from a novel in the 70s that called her the child of the morning, as she was marked by incredible light and sense of vision that she had from early on. So there are a couple of others, there's at least three other novels that I know of about her. One is called Pharaoh, by Eloise Jarvis McGraw. There's Hatshepsut, daughter of Amun, and King and Goddess. And they're all, one is from the late 50s, one from the late 80s, one from the late 70s, one from the late 90s. It is fascinating to me that in all of these decades, from the 60s on, we kept returning to her, not in the pop culture, but people novelistically fictionalized her life and have written about her. And in a truly impressive woman. The next one I want to mention that comes again from Egypt, and to whom I refer so often, is Hypatia or Hypatia of Alexandria, from Alexandria, Egypt. There was born, we're not sure, anywhere from 350 to 370. We don't know, but we do know that she died in 415 Anno Domini. And she was a teacher in Alexandria who has outdone even her own father, who was a professor there, who was a teacher, but she has outdone him with her ingenuity. Both her father and her husband to be Isidoro, who was also very well known. She was an amazing polymath. She was a philosopher, musician, an inventor. She invented astrolabe. Okay. She was also the first one to speak about the earth being round. Astrolabe, we are still relying on her knowledge. When the magnificent, legendary Library of Alexandria was burned, she perished with it. The Christian mob walked in and stripped her down, brought her back to her female status in the society, reminded her of it by stripping her down in the public space, which is called agora. Agora, the significance of agora is very important, because that is the place in Greece where all the public debates and democratic meetings would happen. That's where decisions would be made, and made publicly by debate. And in the public space, the destiny of this woman, who was of the Greco-Roman heritage, she was of Greek heritage, her destiny was to be stripped naked and cut to pieces by the shards of ceramic and strewn all around Alexandria. If there's any way we can retrieve her body and her spirit back, is by remembering that her body is at least in the foundations of one of the most glorious cities on the planet. That is the navel of the world. That is Alexandria. And the way Christians practiced their Christianity at that moment was really not vouchsafing for their faith, for sure. Because Alexander the Great, who brought in Greeks into Egypt himself, was revered because he honored the Egyptian tradition and in fact created an amalgam of the religions and the cultures, and that's why he preserved Egypt, but Egyptians in return revered and honored him as one of their pharaohs, in fact. His own inheritor, Hypatia of Alexandria, being a woman, did not have that kind of faith. But powerful, she was nonetheless. That's exactly what happened to her. She was so powerful that the patriarch of Alexandria felt that she had too much influence on the Roman ruler of the day, or on the masses themselves, on the people by her knowledge. She was so impressive, so charismatic, as well as the students where she taught, at the most magnificent repository of human knowledge that we have. We are estimating that right now we're probably 100th know of what was stored in library. We may have inherited in literature, in scrolls, maybe 100th of it only. So her influence was so tremendous that the newly established Christian patriarch felt that it was the most enormous threat. So I would like to show you something happened here, powerful in 2009. You will see in a minute why I spoke a minute ago about Hatshepsut and this literary imagining of her life that happened in these decades, one after another after another. In film, something else happened. 2009 was marked by two major films. The other one I won't reveal just yet. But this, in 2009, a very renowned Spanish filmmaker, Alejandro Amenábar, made the film called Agora and brought us back to the memory of what it is to be democratic, to meet in the public place, and not to meet again at the expense of woman's body, woman's heritage, and woman's legacy. So I would like us to, we will watch the short, it's only a trailer, but it will give you a sense of the magnitude of the influence of this woman, and you will be able to look at your link. You have just noticed for a second, I was telling our attendants here, our friends with me here, to pay attention or to remember for a second that the way this trailer is set up and it's framed that the emergence of her as a historical subject, as a woman of influence, as woman of vision, is staged in such a way that we see her from the back looking into the sun and into cosmos and being in return lit up by it. And that's going to be significant. A similar representation you're going to see about another woman, of which I will speak briefly, but we're going to see another film, another clip from a film made in the same year. And that is a movie about another extraordinary woman called Hildegard of Bingen, who lived from 1098 to 1179. She had a long, fruitful life for that age. We could call her a Renaissance woman before there was Renaissance. She herself was amazing in that, as a polymath, she was a historian, philosopher, esthetician, musician, theatrical director, playwright, poet, healer, a writer of homeopathic tracts, as well as of music aesthetics, as well as books of healing on herbs that we are actually relying on to this very day. One of her miracle plays is the oldest and the most renowned miracle play that we know of. And rarely do you hear her name. Rarely do you know much about her. But another extraordinary woman, Margaret von Trotta, a German filmmaker, truly renowned herself, in the same year, in 2009, created a film about Hildegard that is called Vision. And Hildegard did something outlandish, which you will see in the script. She not only became an abbess, there was an unruly abbess, because she had her nuns create and recreate and act out these miracle plays about the Passion of Christ and being the brides of Christ by actually having them wear floral wreaths and white gowns and sing and dance in the church. I'm just going to do a quick remark on the most contemporary leading edge happenings. Pussy riots in another church caused 2 women in Russia to be imprisoned for almost 2 years and tortured multiple ways. Have we gone backwards or forwards? I don't know. So when you look at these women, don't think of them as ancient. They're somehow pulsing alive with their spirits and as lighthouses, like that famous, one of the miracles of the world, 7 wonders of the world, the lighthouse of Pharaohs in Alexandria. Somehow, I think that that's a virtual lighthouse now embodied in the new library of Alexandria, but also in the spirit of Hypatia. And in this woman as this one, even in this representation of Hildegard, who became a saint after all of that, after speaking about being healed by nature, not by God, after being adamant about her visions and saying, I know what I see, she managed to come into contact with and correspond with Pope and bishops and politicians and managed to build 2 huge nunneries and monasteries. Built them, and when I mean that, I mean she even used her own physical labor, her ingenuity, found the money, found the masons and everybody, and participated in the construction of it. Not only that, she got the funds. So she is an incredible woman of whom we have to know, who spoke about the greening power theology, viriditas. And on the very first day, I talked to you about Joanna Macy, the eco-philosopher, who actually wrote a book about the greening of the self. So this is renewing only the knowledge that we already had in these women. So again, we're going to watch a clip from the, again, 2009 movie called Vision about Hildegard of Bingen. And you guys online, please click on your links that you were provided, and we'll go from there. Please enjoy. I can barely contain my excitement of being able to speak of these women to you today, and most importantly, to put them into a gathering of women where they speak of their life together in one place. I just want to draw your attention real quickly on the representation of all three of these, where they stand, one woman alone stands in front of the masses of established order. And she's filmically, of course, represented with the one shedding the light on them as she's radiating from her place of conviction, from her courage of conviction that is unstoppable. What does Hildegard say? I must continue. I must continue. It is the conviction, the courage, the impetus, the strength of the vision, but it is also a bodily drive that pushes even against the limits of the body sometimes. And you have to continue. So what happens with her, her life, just like the lives of other Christian martyrs, has been marked by stigmata. She falls sick, bedridden on her deathbed at least 2 times and reemerges out of that self-healing, that's what she uses later as a testimony to God's power. And then she emerges with even stronger conviction, with greater project, and with greater capacity to mobilize people around her, to let her lead. So I'm going to say something that I hope you hold on to for later. She stages a crisis and reemerges out of that, even her bodily crisis, and reemerges out of that with even greater zest and passion for life. And then she says something outrageous at the beginning, something that is so resonant with everything that we have said. Her first words that we see in this trailer. Self-determination is a God-given right. So she folds them together, that I am not divorced from God, no less than God, and that if I need to appeal to divine right, it has been given to me by birthright. And that's why she goes back to the body, to the natural self, to the nature itself, folding back in the natural world into the greatest God creation, not gift to us just to serve us, but we are part of it. It is part of us, undeniably. So just mark the years when she was born and what she has done. She was a painter too, a composer. To this day, composers know of her and play her music to this day. So something that, one more thing I want you to hold on to is that when you saw the image of that beautiful, that's a nun in white dress whirling. Yes? If you can hold on to that for a second. So what marks the lives of these women, if I can narrow it down to these characteristics, this is a sort of a rough blocking off some of these things, is that they had the courage of conviction, which Alberto mentioned when he spoke of Carl Rogers and Maslow and his own work and his own convictions, that the courage of conviction and a sense of a drive is extraordinarily present in these people. But all of them actually spoke about that being in all of us. They tried to reassure us that it is within us. They had a creative vision that was extremely compelling, that drove their entire life and pushed, like I said, even against the limits of their own body and their human existence, with which they felt that they were benefiting the human existence. They were marked by leadership and storytelling, capacity to tell convincing stories. And that leadership actually depending on that, of being, as Gary spoke of, being in touch with the needs of people, having a sense of the social feeling the social collective pulse and being able to speak to them in ways that they can relate to, that resonates with their reality, with their needs, with their desires, with their aspirations, and have the capacity to, like I said, not just be an example, but to speak in ways, to narrativize back to the people their own condition. That's what mobilized the passions, the energies, the motivation of the people to not follow them, but have their own sense of agency. That's what marked their leadership. And they also acquired and had technical skills and technical knowledge, which they developed over time, but also knew who to reach out to develop them, and rely on others to develop them in order to be able to execute this vision. Well, that's somewhat of a scary story, but scary expression, but to bring the vision to fruition, to manifest the vision, to realize, to actualize the vision as they were actualizing themselves by the very tools that they were using, as well as empowering the people by the very vision and the tools and the storytelling to do that. For example, Hatshepsut had a favorite architect, a builder on whom she dedicatedly relied on and learned from to help her, mind you, have the extent of more than 100 of architectural projects and building projects completed. So something to think about when we think of these women. And now I turn to a forgotten but nonetheless practiced, so to speak, Polish psychologist, Kazimierz Dabrowski, who worked in the 70s and 80s and is known as the father of the gifted and talented education. Interestingly enough, the importance of his work is probably best felt and actualized in the U.S. And I say interestingly because they have, in the U.S., pushed the notion of the gifted and talented, even in the public schools right now. My own children are able they don't differentiate socially, but in terms of a pace of learning, they will cater to children and create advanced programs where they can go so that nobody holds anybody back. But they are asked to be mentors, supporters, and true, genuine colleagues to other children that may not be going at the same pace. So this way they go forward, but the teacher's time is liberated also to give more attention to the one that needs to maybe go in at a different pace. Another more important thing as well is that you have to diversify the interests and maybe see that not all children will be as advanced in all areas. And yet, that same culture, as Alberto can vouchsafe, heavily medicates their own children for hyperactivity and other things. So a cause that is very important and dear to me that I wanted to mention today, that we need to stop medicating our children and let them move around, let them play, so we would not have that kind of chaos that I don't believe in, that actually happens in an environment that is conducive to them to be self-expressive in all aspects of their personality, kinetically, intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, and socially. So this extraordinary man created a theory that to this day we know as positive disintegration theory. So Polish psychologist, psychiatrist, and physician Kazimierz Dabrowski conceptualized theory of positive disintegration, which addresses breaking away from social norms, in particular as staging of personal crisis, which has the potential to lead to personal expansion and evolvement. Anxiety, depression, and psychoneurosis, which are induced at such critical moments, become hypersensitive responses to personal crisis. An individual driven to autonomy thus gets involved in a transformational process which requires multi-level perception to one's own values, opinions, and choices. Such multi-level perception is in contrast with crisis, which tends to present us with predetermined choices and decisions in terms of either or alternatives. Dabrowski saw personality as existential and experiential processes of development and becoming as a continual creation and recreation in which emotional reactions are key guidance. He attributed most significance to the narrative in subjective formation, autobiography in particular, and used it in his practice. Dabrowski's ideas contributed dramatically to the recognition of the gifted and talented today. So, huge charges, powerful nods in what I've written here to in a fast and furious way present to you this theory is that emotions are your greatest GPS in the world. It is your own system, your own body pushing back at you saying it is not right and it is not okay. So the notion of medicating sensation, whether that's emotional pain or physical pain, is extremely damaging in the long run. You may temporarily soothe it, put a Band-Aid on it if you can. But in the long run, you are undercutting your own developmental processes. You're not listening to your pace. You're not listening to the psychosomatic signals that your entire system is sending to you in this process, which could be signaling the neglect of the self, the neglect of the care of the body, exerting too much, could also be signaling and ushering of the new stage in life, in which we have, there's research that has been done and it's been known that not only that every so often we have our whole body cells change themselves, so every 7 years approximately we have a whole new body as such, because the cells turn around that way. But we actually have developmental spans of every 7 years, 1 to 7, 7 to 14, 14 to 28, and on and on and on. And if you don't pay attention to those thresholds, and we women have an even more important threshold every month, if you don't pay attention to what your body's telling you, then you will be diagnosing yourself with this and that. You will also diagnose 51% of the humanity as being terrible during PMS, whereas I will just leave it at this. That is by far our most honest time where we cannot shove under the blanket what it is that has been ailing, hurting, exhausting us, or limiting us. I'll leave it at that. So, what are some of the pathways and processes here? These are big, significant words that are used, but I will unfold them, unpack them with you. First of all, the notion of passing that has been so terrible, our own mortality, that makes us actually, lulls us into a certain kind of conformity, into a certain kind of existence. We continually speak of mortality and think of it, what is it that is worth our fight or not worth our fight? My own son asked me about all these amazing people that Gary spoke of, and Alberto literally asked me about all three of them, Luther King, Lincoln, and Gandhi. Why were they all killed? Tell me the worth of their work if those very people killed them. And I had to come up with a big answers and a lot of emotional pleading and a lot of spiritual conviction outside of religious, institutionalized religious contexts. I had to appeal in grand ways to make him feel the worthiness of his own life, the significance of his actions, and the power and the consequence of them. And also to say the worthiness of this sacrifice without having to nudge my own child to put himself in the harm's way, but to be more effective longer, living longer and being effective longer. And it takes a lot of skills to do that, because they ask a lot of amazing questions. So this notion of passing and what is worth our time that makes a lot of people willing to actually put their life as the ultimate value in the harm's way for the vision, and makes other people completely resign and say, what's the point? What's the point? I don't want to suffer. I don't want to struggle. I want to have it the easy way. But life doesn't happen that way. So that beautiful extremes, those contrasts, will put the person into a place of boredom, stagnation, and withering away, and utter dissatisfaction if you don't go out there and do something about it. There's always the cold turning into hot, and hot by overexertion going into cold. So we're blessed to have those polarities, but we're always asked to emerge into the next and next and next platform. So the notion of passing becomes the notion of actually passageway, passing as expiring, but nonetheless using that passage of time and of age and of stages into passing over into a different form that is transforming personally. What are some important notions that I found as pathways? That you have to have, we spoke of this, a sense of the emerging worldview, which always starts from the desires, needs, and aspirations. And then you are able to recognize them as new values, and if you are able to be on the leading edge of your own compatriots, of your own fellow humans, that's where you will be on the leading edge if you want to develop as a leader. But even if you want to develop as within yourself, solely as a person, I said they're always intertwined, unavoidably. So having a sense of the emerging worldview. Exquisite individuality, I already spoke about, and our sense of increased democratization of excellence. And I'll just quickly refer back to what I just said, that exquisite individuality is one's birthright. It's a matter of that passageway, passing over, and discovering your own pathways through different stages into transformation. Refined perception, I spoke of that before, that you have to be the great lover of the world and the self, and that's with a capital L. You have to be a great appreciator, to have a sense of wonder and excitement to be alive and even in pain and struggling in the world, of saying this too shall pass, this too is good for a reason. Okay? So you have to have, with that way, refined perception to have a sense of awe in the world, as well as sense of enchantment, a love of life, and love of people and of the world. You have to have a sense of, in the penchant for mutual recognition, and then that's where the notion of humility we mentioned before works in. I see you, and I want to be seen by you in everything that I am, not only in the physical appearance, but in all the dimensions. I want to see you in all that you are, and engage you as a person in all that you are, as the way I also want to be seen. Ivo Schlaus very often likes to speak of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would love to be done unto you. Deepened self-reflection. So even before that, there has to be love of the self, appreciation of the self, that it's worth your time to self-reflect, not in a self-flagellating way of beating yourself down, but in wanting to evolve, in wanting to be your own good company. If you're sitting there by yourself and you're feeling that you have this wonderful self-talk, I hope you do this. You have been a good friend to me, to your own body. You have carried me well, even when I pushed you. You have carried me through time and space and served me well. I have been my own good companion. And if you sit in the loneliness, or even better, aloneness, and feel that you are your own good company, you know how to entertain, comfort, and serve yourself. That's where you should be practicing that. Not one to another in the exploitative way, but within yourself. Then you know you're doing well, regardless of what's going on and what you're going through. Sort of responding to these pathways and processes are particular we could say visions that you can have, and understanding that you can have. That with the emerging worldview, what we're seeing these days is, I spoke of interdisciplinarity initially, and now we're understanding that we're having a greater and greater desire for unified fields. Einstein wanted to develop unified field theory. Everybody's still working on that. unified fields in the studies, more unified interdisciplinary sciences, also more unified sense of self, but not singular entity that is predetermined. That's what I'm talking about. But when you speak of unified field, that there are many plateaus, many aspects, many dimensions, many frequencies, and these are very charged, powerful words to use. Multiple energies, convergence, you are a compendium, a convergence of these in a unified field that shifts and is in motion. Then also exquisite individuality is characterized by and is also functioning on a range or on a scale of interests, scale of emotions, scale of even interactions. How we keep our humanity in check is that we approach each other with humbleness, with understanding that I see you as a person, with that mutual recognition and empathic vision that I brought here. That's what it requires. Mutual recognition requires empathic vision. I see you in all of your humanity, and then you keep yourself in check, which is a very democratic thing along the scale of classes, age differentiation, sexual orientation, racial differentiations, and things like that. So I spoke of that before, that I always spend time in the streets. Then on the deepened self-reflection, the notion of inner autonomy is very significant, because if you don't have a sense of sovereignty, autonomy, or confidence, as we say, within, everything from the outside will appear as a threat. Everything and everybody will become a threat. That is in sort of an anecdotal, quotable way that I have to run through this. And you derive your own significance beyond this. So I came up with another alliterated form of, I love to use alliteration because it's because of its musicality. I say the wherewithal is within. And I mentioned this woman and this scientist and clinician, Jean Shinoda Bolen, who said, you have the need and the right to spend part of your life caring for your soul. It is not easy. You have to resist the demands of the work-oriented, often defensive element in your psyche that measures life only in terms of output. How much you produce, not in terms of the quality of your life experiences. To be a soulful person means to go against all the pervasive, prove yourself values of your culture and instead treasure what is unique and eternal and valuable in yourself and your own personal evolution. I will peel off one layer from this quote. I would love to peel off the notion of resistance and going against. That which you resist persists. Others have said that, not me. And if you energize, we spoke of polarizing the world through Warsaw Pact and NATO. If you energize it, then that's where the enemy and us are in this brotherly hug. But I talked about being able to carry the child on your hip, run through the noise, the daily grind of life, the messiness of life, and still being able to hold on to that spot, to that lit up spot within you, and being able to also find a way to take a minute, a breather, as they say in America, to look into your soul, to look on the inside, on that vision, in the third eye, if you will. Now, we speak of that in academia. Times have changed. To be within yourself, within that sovereign space inside, which is very, very expensive, for a minute to recharge, and to ask for care. And to expect support. That is extremely difficult for us women. So what is it that we know today? Remember I mentioned early that there's technical knowledge and skills and things that these women had and the leaders have to manifest and actualize their vision. Some of the things that we know today is that nothing in the universe can be still. Everything moves and vibrates. Everything is in vibration. If you try to stand still, you you cannot. You simply cannot. Life will happen to you. But this time you will not be in the driver's seat, in the proactive place. You will be in the reactionary. And oftentimes we, at one stage or another, one person or another scream, why me? Why again? Why me? I'm the victim of all of this. Whereas if you're on the leading edge of your own curves, of your own, surfing the flows of life, you get washed over, but there's some kind of a thrill that you develop for being able to get back up. So nothing is also wasted. We already know that. Energy is never lost, only transformed. As energy, we never cease. Now I'm going beyond, and I'll just leave it at that. So think about passing and transformation. We are incomplete, we are imperfect, and that is a perfect guarantee of our continuity. And if you are not perfect, and if you are incomplete, then don't worry, the job is never done. And because it's never done, it's good, and it shouldn't be perfect. Everything is dynamic, relational, and becoming. Every position, every life form is an invaluable perspective that adds to the collective knowledge and evolution. Alberto spoke about that. I spoke about that when I spoke of the web of life, and Alberto spoke about even internalizing, swallowing the entire planet and bubbling up from the inside, feeling that how great your boundaries can be. You spoke of expanding boundaries, even feeling them physically and emotionally and psychologically, that they expand. So divisions, contrasts, oppositions are means by which we make distinctions and refine our directions, desires, aspirations, and choices. In other words, thank you for being different from me. I will no longer use the term enemy, but if you're my antagonist or opponent, antagonist is good because it reminds me of literature and it's not as threatening. For the first time, you'll be able to engage in empire in an empathic way. You have expanded my world tremendously by that expression. I'm talking to Alberto. And to say thank you to the tough ones in our lives, because they give us a point of reference, a launching platform from which we know what we can be made of. That way we're also soothing the edge of not actually creating more enemies and in general benefiting the world. So I go to somebody who is a whirling dervish. Remember I asked you to pay attention to the woman that, the nun that was spinning in the white robe. And this man, Jalaluddin al-Rumi, was a Persian man, but who lived and died in Konya in Turkey, and found a whirling dervish order that is mystical Islamic order of a whirling dervish who dance ecstatically to express their love of the cosmos and to replicate the way cosmos moves. Their ritual usually consists of sheikh, who is the leader, who comes in and represents the sun, the light. The brothers come in and they spin around him, around their own axis and around him. So in singing and in dancing, they express that nothing ever stands still, nor it should, that they honor the order, the cosmic order, and that the ultimate knowledge is only one, and that is love. And that too is only an approximation of the grand design of consciousness. So I dance. I dance. And I had one of the most inspiring conversations with an extraordinary man, Ralph Wolf, who was a serious bureaucrat, a man who accredits entire universities. And there are men in those kinds of establishments, like my own mentors, Gary Jacobs and Ivo Schlaus, who come out, and when he met me, he didn't have much time. He was interested to meet who I am, and he saw me, but wanted to hear from me, and that's another great thing. In this society, especially with women and children and others we tell them, who do you think you are? Oh, those ideas are seductive. Do you really think you can make that? And you can turn that muting of a person with 2 words. Tell me. And listen. So he went straight for it. And he said, what is your spiritual practice? Those were the very first few words we exchanged. And I looked back and I said, I dance. He looked back into my eyes and he said, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. It makes an enormous amount of sense. But what he also meant is by what I've seen, it makes sense for you personally. And in the shamanic cultures, when you go to people because you're depressed, to the shaman, to the collective, because you're depressed and anxious and struggling, they don't necessarily always give you herbs and things. Yes, maybe to soothe you if you're in a critical condition, but then they say, when have you stopped singing and dancing to get out of yourself, to replicate the rhythm? So this is a couple of lines from me, because after another session I'll be leaving. I'm going to a conference in Germany. And before I leave, I wanted to leave something very personal that came out of my dance. That it was a conversation with all these beautiful people that I've met in my life and that I'm yet to meet. And that came from also my direct address to Rumi. And before I read these lines to you, leave them with them, I want to make sure that I thank everybody, that I do see you, I feel your frequency and vibration, all of you that are online, you are not defaced. And I most importantly want to make sure that I thank our staff in India. First and foremost, the person that I work with almost on a daily basis, Shweta. I see you and thank you. Ranjani, Vasugi. I have not met everybody, but everybody that is there from staff, I say hello and I'll see you soon. And I thank you for everything that you've done to make this possible for all of us, but for me personally. So with a hungry heart and bare feet, I found our life as great as our capacity to feel. Dance is your birthright. In the quickening of such grace, I dare to bear the soul. Thank you.
I'm asking you if what you were saying, this is a nun dancing and the dervishes dancing and your own dancing, if it's also, in other words, a way to be grounded, to have roots, and in order, so I translated in my own words, to have, did I understand it correctly, to be grounded, to sprout deep roots in the ground, which is my spiritual ground, but it's also my social ground, my cultural ground, my psychological ground, then only if I'm deeply rooted, I can move a lot and will a lot. So this paradoxical aspect of social and personal health and well-being.
Oh, that is beautiful. At this point, we have quotable Alberto, because I will be quoting you to my dance students. Dancing is a way of being grounded, and they'll say, what do you mean? Isn't it exactly constantly moving and unleashing and spinning and jumping in the air? And that's exactly the most beautiful paradox about it. That is that by dancing is a way of grounding, that's what Alberto said, and it says if we're deeply grounded in the body, in feeling the body, in the movement. So you ground yourself by feeling all the different parts of your body, by feeling, expressing the emotions, but also being in tune with the motion of the universe. That's a way of grounding too. That you can go a lot, and you can move a lot in life and go a long way. That's me adding to you. And I will just mention one thing, the notion of balance, of which you've spoken in self-actualization. Balance is not static. It can be. You're not a statue, nor should you be. Women have been made into caryatides in representing this and that. Well, everybody frets when a woman dances. One of the reasons I spoke of bearing the soul is because that particular dance that I do, which is Oriental dance, the costuming for it is very bearing. So I wanted to say, what I'm bearing here is what you're seeing is the skeleton of my soul, not the body. And if you're not able to see that, you are wasting out on your own refinement of perception and your own evolvement by watching me. So the balance is a matter of shifting, constantly moving from one leg to another, from another surface to another. And that too brings about the managing, balancing is better, dancing through your domains. Who was it that is a fellow, a marvelous woman? I have her somewhere here in my notes, who wrote Dancing on the Edge. She's a fellow of the Academy, I think, and I can find her name in a minute when you guys, there she is. She was meant to be mentioned. Maureen O'Hara. She wrote Dancing on the Edge. Oh, here we go. A name you gotta know. Dancing at the Edge, Competence, Culture, and Organization in the 21st Century, published in 2012. So our colleague, our fellow, Maureen O'Hara wrote that. People are recognizing more the power of dance. So this is so beautifully said and so necessary, not to mention the fact that actual dancing in life gives you an enormous capacity for socializing in a harmonious way that is not intrusive, that is not sleazy, as we would say in American slang, interacting, enjoying, going out, as well as experiencing the self in this different fashion.
I think Shweta had a question.
Yeah.
Why don't you put her on?
Okay. Shweta, you can ask your question now.
Hi Nila, I would first like to thank you on behalf of me and my team for your support. Your presentation was so emotional and moving, full of energy. I just enjoyed every bit of it. So this is the question I have. Society is complex and well designed. It tries to be efficient to the minutest detail in order to sustain. One of the most essential part of society and its microcosm are women, but still they are disregarded on a large scale. In this situation, why does the collective's energy, that is women as the collective, not able to bring a dramatic change?
Mm-hmm. I should answer. Anybody want to take that one? It's like, no, you took that on. You answer. Okay. Well, this is now it's going to get a little bit tough for a second. One of the ways abuse is manifested or carried out is by isolating the individual from other individuals, from being able to organize, to even commiserate, then by devaluing their capacities, taking away, in the most obvious way, education or being able to be a political subject to vote or this or that. Then distraction as well. I mentioned a second ago how hard it is for, how terrible it is for a woman at one point to be dancing. Ibsen's play, Doll's House, speaks about this terrible moment when the wife starts dancing this tarantula dance. The whole world, their whole society spins out of order because of that. But in some ways, you are also Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Women, a must-know text. She's an incredible human being, an incredible thinker, spoke of the fact that we get distracted by needing to be pretty, coquettish, ladylike, meaning that ladylike meant to be that you have to dress, act, behave in proper certain ways and things like that. And not just do that for others, that you measure your own worth by how beautiful you are, how well done you are, or well done up. What is the word? I forgot. I'm sorry. My English sometimes breaks down. Also, another way of abuse is overwhelming with responsibility. And we witnessed that not just in the old age now. I can relate to that. And as I'm sure you can too, there's the notion of allowing. Yes, you can go to school. You can develop career. You can do all that if you can put that on your plate as well. Yes? So that's what I've done. I've done it the very, very hard way. I had to. I had no choice. I had to do three jobs and God knows what other things, and then be asked, how come you are in the studies at that age? For some things you're too young, for others you're too old, you're too pretty, you're not pretty enough, you are this or that. So these measurements are never your own or never devised by you. They're imposed on you and you get overwhelmed. So between just a couple of things that I mentioned, between isolation, devaluing, distraction, and overwhelming, there was reduced capacity to organize. And then all of those things were internalized, so we have patriarchal mothers that are actually thinking that they're protecting their daughters, perpetuating the same modes of abuse. So, have we been organized? Heck yes. But it's funny, I think it's really, really funny that we talk about, we have the great man theory, Napoleonic subject in history, whereas actually it has been more great woman throughout history, that there was more singular women that rose to power in that way than collectively women that they could. So now we're seeing, not that they didn't, of the suffragists and on, but you're saying up to this point, how come it hasn't been to the greatest extent? This is what I'm able to answer you on the spot. From what I've seen as a pattern, a collective pattern, which has precluded us from rising on a greater scale. And then there's shaming. There's shaming to this day. I mean, there's magnificent Rush Limbaugh, who is a talk show host, extremely powerful in the U.S., who was shaming feminism, calling them feminazis. The man was dethroned from his sponsors exactly over the issue of contraception that was started in Congress, because he said horrible things about the woman lawyer who spoke on behalf of women's choice. So this is very, very current, and your question is extremely powerful, because we need to ask, how can we organize without being told that we're taking away time from the family? You're a terrible mother if you're in the streets. Why aren't you with your children? You're taking away from the family and the state. You're not producing. How can you have time to organize and stand together? I wanted to tell my own son to call himself feminist, and immediately, I mean, my son is an extraordinary person in his own right. He's my greatest teacher. You should see the reaction of both my son and daughter. They did not hear that from this mother. They did not. They took it like a sponge, absorbed it from the society, and it was in the air, somehow feels that would be disgraceful. That would be terrible.
I'd like to give my own view on this, but something I heard for the first time when I went to India about 40 years ago, an old proverb which is probably a few thousand years old, and I may not be saying it right, but anybody can correct me who knows it better. The proverb is something like, you can put the men traditionally used to wear tufts, and the women wore braids. And the proverb is, you can tie any number of tufts together, but you can only tie two braids together.
Oh.
But the old Indian proverb that you can tie any number of tufts, meaning men's hairs together, but you can only tie two braids together. And I think there's more to it than just a proverb. If you see the social organization of society, the security of men comes from their relationships and association. The security of women comes from their relationship to a man. And every other woman is potentially a competitor for that relationship. Because the woman has to attract the man from others, especially in a monogamous, most especially, but even if it's not monogamous, still there's a question of priority. So anyway, that's something that comes to mind from traditional thought. I'd like to, it's a very interesting question. I'd like to just comment on a few other points that you raised, because I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation, and I would highlight a dozen points at least if I had the opportunity. And I want to see this movie Agora also. I missed that. It looks really very interesting. One of the things you talked about very quickly was this multi-level perception that things are not simply reduced to either or alternatives. I think it's a very important point for individuality. We have a subject coming up on the last day called Ways of Knowing, in which I'd like to come back to that. So I just want to highlight it now that Mila's the one who put it on the table, and it's a topic itself that is worthy of real consideration. Because your fourth point in your list of where is it? Your fourth point under Hildegard von Bingen was knowledge and skill. And so knowledge is not just a quantity of knowledge, but is what is knowledge for us. So I think this highlights a big area which we really haven't talked about so far, and just wanted to flag it. Your second point I'm highlighting was that which resists persists. I think it's also a fascinating point, and it's a lesson that I have personally learned in recent years, which I consider of immense value. I'd also like to come back to that in my concluding remarks on the last day, because when we're trying to talk about what practical lessons we can take from this, and I think this is really one of them. And the third point you made is directly related to that, and if I understood you correctly, the role of opposition in our growth, which is a related issue but not exactly the same. And Giovanni is going to be talking to that in terms of challenges. Opposition is an extreme form of challenge. We have challenges where we don't have an opponent except ourselves, but we've still got a problem. But opposition is the challenge is embodied in an opposing force that's trying to destroy you or conquer you or whatever it is. And I'd like to come back to that when we're talking about experience. So I think these are three very profound points. Then I just couldn't resist, because you started your presentation or early on raising the question that your son put to you about Lincoln, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King. And I have some thoughts on that which are related to this whole subject that we've been talking about, of the role of the individual in society. And I have 3 or 4 explanations for why each of them died as they did. Maybe none of these explanations are total or satisfying, but I think they're relevant. Each of them took on a task which was beyond certainly the physical limits of any person to accomplish. And in each of those cases, they were confronting an essential, not a personal conflict, but a fundamental social conflict, in which they decided to get in the middle of 2 warring parties. And I think experience shows the easiest way to get destroyed is trying to, that was what the story of Romeo and Juliet. Here were 2 kids, innocent kids, who not only wanted to enjoy, to have love, but hoped that they could somehow reconcile their families in the process. And they did. The irony is, in fact, it's the same message, because they did reconcile the families by their self-sacrifice. And I think, so they took on a situation of intense conflict, and they confronted forces that were not ready for peaceful resolution. I'd say the second is that in terms of magnitude, because everything depends not just on the way we configure a situation, but the intensity of the situation. In each of these cases, the magnitude of the intensity was extremely great. And it took the peak of their efforts to the last drop of exhaustion in order to do what they did. The third is, in the case of Mahatma Gandhi, it's interesting. In the case of Lincoln, it's clear. And I tried to bring it out yesterday, even in the North, where they believed in abolishing slavery, very few of them, there were some, of course, in Massachusetts and New England, but very few of them believed in an integrated society. In fact, even Lincoln believed that there was no way to integrate 4 million blacks into the American society at that time. So one of the things they were working on, and he worked on, was creating a colony so that the blacks who were liberated from slavery, not all of them, because we had a lot of free blacks at that time in the North, but the southern blacks who were liberated from slavery would actually be provided with a new homeland. And it was supposed to be in Central America somewhere, and they actually tried something. And of course, Liberia was founded as a new home for slaves who were liberated slaves, not only from North America, but from the Caribbean as well. So there was a deep conflict in the society, not just about whether slavery should be abolished, but whether or not there should be racial integration. In India, at the time of the independence movement, the conflict was between peaceful movement to independence and violent movement to independence. And there were many who were not ready for fighting, but there were a great many who were eager for fighting and were eager to throw off the British force violently. And Gandhi stood in between those two, and he said, no, I won't permit it. And he had such an extraordinary power in the society that he said, if you are violent, I will simply stop the independence movement. That did not, there was anger, there was bitterness, there was resentment in the society. In the Amritsar massacre in, 1918 or 1919, 3,000 Indians were just shot down by the British in Amritsar, and the English were celebrating the General Dyer who did that as a hero. There were people in India who were furious, who were outraged, who felt, no, violence is our birthright. We have a right to fight these people. So he went and took on the violence not only of the British, but the violent impulse of the Indian society as well. And my last comment was, in each case, if you look not at his death as a failure, because I don't think any of them considered their death as a failure. I think in each case, nobody wants to die, I think, but in each case what they really wanted was the fulfillment of their goal. Their aspiration was for a goal greater than themselves. And in each case, the goal was given a much greater fulfillment by their violent death. Because, for example, in the case of the U.S. with Lincoln, the problem was that even after the end of the Civil War and after the abolition of slavery, the tensions in the society were enormous. And it needed a sacrifice. It needed there were many people who felt that Lincoln had done everything wrong. He was not a hero in the country. When the war was over and there was total contention, by dying, he was elevated to martyrdom. And that helped absorb the tensions, the unresolved tensions. In India, if Gandhi had been killed by a Muslim, it would have been widespread civil war. The saving grace was, he was killed by a Hindu extremist. And that helped bring the country together because it helped the country move away from extremism towards the secular society which was founded and which he supported. So his goals were actually fulfilled by his death in that way. And in fact, which is not quite so commonly known, that at the time of his death, he had already been largely repudiated by the leaders of the Communist Party, who were no longer following his advice. So nobody believed that his ideas for what to do after the end of getting independence made any sense, really. But they didn't say it. He had a lot of faddistic ideas. But by dying here, he made the ultimate sacrifice for the thing he really cared about, was Indian freedom.
I had a couple of comments, unless somebody else has any other questions or anything. A couple of things that are important, I'll keep them as brief as possible. When it came to, you spoke about women and men, this metaphoric representation through braids, that you can mobilize and unite men, but women are fighting for attention. And that has been exactly, that's the point where I spoke about by isolation, that you isolate them through envy, put them in a competitive place so that they cannot feel that they can relate or they can unite. And to this day, if you look at the dating scene of any urban, modern, Western urban, I have to be careful to give my parameters, what you will hear women complaining about is the men that cannot make commitment in this, and this is what they do. I mean, they go with one woman until she causes some trouble, or something tightens up, or is not interesting anymore, and they move on to another. And the woman says, what's wrong with me? Maybe I'm not that beautiful, maybe I'm not that exciting, maybe I'm not this or that, and they never feel enough, whereas nobody's looking at the man and saying, you're in a continual state of distraction. When are you going to start looking at yourself at one point or another? But women internalized it so much that modern, educated, professional women are commiserating together, thinking, what's wrong with me? Or am I intimidating for being too intelligent? Who spoke of that? That you have to dumb yourself. Alberto spoke of that. I mean, Alberto knows exactly where the nerve is. So it's like we're willing to dumb ourselves down because we're so hungry for care, attention, support, and love that this is what's going on. And this is the way it's done. Unfortunately, we can enable that kind of behavior with ourselves or with others. And the tradition, this has been a long time established, the dichotomy between whore and virgin. Even Jesus' mother had to be virgin. So if she is the ideal of our womanhood, we are all bound to be whores. Is that true? That was, graphically said, but we're all bound to fail as women, because if your motherhood is dependent on being the virgin mother, you stand no chance. There are other ideals that could have been put in front of us. There's Inanna, who is the goddess of fertility. She was goddess and revered. That was not a problem. But we had to have a model that is an impossible model to emulate. Impossible to emulate. So our psyche has been split between whore and virgin. Both are socially inefficient. Both. One is abhorred and judged and experiencing social death, of which Alberto is speaking. The other one is also experiencing social death. She's put in a frame. She's a virgin. She's ideal. She's dead. She's a mere representation. She's not a woman of flesh and blood. So both of them are stripped away of social agency. And we internalize that, and then we continually do that. So you have a situation where our girls to this day are being overly sexualized and expected to behave this way or that way without being able to understand their own sexuality or sense of fulfillment. All because something male is being projected onto them. The male desire for you desire me for something, but then you judge me for it and continue me or consider me less than. It's an impossible cycle. It's an impossible cycle. So there are terrible mixed messages that we're getting there in the projection of male desire that we internalize, and we don't need anybody. We can be by ourselves and condition ourselves to, dissect our bodies, devalue it over the size, shape, this or that. The second thing that I want to really quickly mention is that, to repeat what this is quotable Gary now, his goals were fulfilled by his death. And that is something very important, but they had a productive and long enough life to be able to do that. So human condition in its essence requires challenges and oppositions. It doesn't matter where you're at. If you're in Yugoslavia, your enemy is so-and-so. Then it got atomized less and less. Then it's Croats against Serbs against Muslims against this or that. Then if we are independent, then you go to Montenegro. Then you have this faction with that faction. Then, you belong to that part of the country and you belong to that part. If you leave those alone, all the way down to one person that you pointed out, you start creating obstacles. And we have to stop. We have to understand that. Instead of spitting on Hitler, we have to understand him so we know how we're staging all machoism inside women too. If we don't understand them, it is easy to externalize them, label them, and use them as a culprit. I don't know who that is. It just becomes a label. Hitler has become a label. Saddam has been like Hitler, and Milosevic was like Saddam and Hitler, and on and on and on and on. But if we stop and think about it and feel, if we understand that the human condition is about staging obstacles for the delight of overcoming them, everything becomes softer. And we understand that it's contrast, not opposition. So that's why it's significant. This is a tool. This is a very important tool to carry with yourself. Okay? And then those were, and I had two quick notes. It's even less than 2 minutes. It's very important because it's speaking to the new paradigm shift that we at the Academy, we have this initiative about the new paradigm. And this is so important. I have to pay, respect again to you, Gary, for initiating this course, for making this happen. Why is it important to focus on consciousness on the individual? It is because, and that's why I speak of intimacy, of women, of all of this, on any point of associating with self and another, that the new paradigm shift is something that needs to happen, and it's happening, I'm faithful and hopeful, something that needs to happen as an intimate and imminent transformation as the quantum shift on the consciousness level of the deepest individual, intimate and imminent level to manifest out. And this is why I will say the self is always, but do remember, the self is always in excess even of its own multiple actualizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was terrific.